We broadcast the plea across 6 arms of the spiral and waited for the polite ships. The vellum array looks delicate from outside, a ring of city and farm tissue, braided around an amber dwarf, cursive handwriting in orbit. From inside, it is sweat and salt and 1,000 clever compromises. The day the rivers came, those compromises failed loudly. Our coolant tower's spires that breathe cold like standing glaciers shrieked. As the raiders' scavenger fields pulled at their molecules the way a butcher's hook pulls at meat, the eastward farms became a sheet of bubbled glass, plants trapped mid-breath under a glaze of their own condensed humidity. A pressure door buckled and jammed with someone's hand in it. The list of names started, and once a list begins, an archive never lets it stop. 3 rotations later, the smoke had stopped pretending to be clouds and settled where smoke belongs. In the lungs, in the curtains, in history. The holotorium filled with elders and engineers and the kinds of traders who stay through storms. Because storm stories sell. We had numbers. We had diagrams. We did not have a plan that didn't require the universe to be kinder than it has ever been. Severity Index 5, said Elder Seth, whose frill had silvered with decisions. Appeal level, urgent, not calamity. We mustn't invite predators. I held my tablet in both hands so my frill wouldn't betray me by lifting. Elder, I said, predators aren't waiting on our diction. He fixed me with the exhausted patience of a teacher who knows a student is right and hates it. I am archivist here in title, junior in salary, apprentice in the ways of public speech. Archivists are trained to watch without waiting. The rivers had burned that rule with the raspberries. I still smelled sugar scorched into something that could not be sweet again. We tuned the appeal for every culture we could name, courier chime for the hypnotic worlds, tight beam legales for the consortium fleets, a pictographic packet with drawings of our ring and our broken places for the migrants, who carry their libraries in their heads. We offered reciprocal passage, a permanent dock for relief craft, genetic access to our seed bank. We summoned help with all the soft titles we could afford to spend. When the packet left, the holotorium went very quiet. Waiting is the heaviest part of the job. You can send it with tasks catalog this, inventory that. Draft a letter to the next of kin that tells the truth and still lets them sleep. But the wait never goes away. We waited for a day, and then another, and then the amber dwarf made its long, patient turn, and the raised deep high telescopes blinked data contact. One ship, not a flotilla, heaped like a small sun. Trajectory that said we know where you live, and we do not fear your tide. The eye tagged an emblem on its dorsal shell wreath around a blue sphere, and the holotorium air thinned, Earth, someone whispered, as if speaking the word too loudly might make it knock. Deathworlders, the word tastes like myth in the mouth. You learn it beside other words that have teeth, Storm Hunter, Saltburn, Pyrrhus. You learn the jokes about humans. The cartoon of a species that solved planetary scale murder weather by inventing stronger knees, and then used those knees to climb whatever mountains angered them. You read their songs loud, messy, unembarrassed. You also read the treaties, the rescues, the way they put their names in the log of other people's dead and do the arithmetic honestly. Elder Seth exhaled. We asked for help. We did not ask for. That help is a verb, Elder, I said before my caution caught up. Perhaps they will decline to conjugate politely. He flicked a wry glance toward me that said, say that again in a decade when your back hurts. The arrival window widened with no drama. The ship chose a slot among the trader berths, big and calm, and my translator whispered the painted name across the interior of my ears. USV Stone Garden. I braced for banners. What came down the throat lock instead were boots with honest scuffs, and a woman who laughed with the lines around her eyes before she laughed with her mouth. Directorate of Mutual Aid, she said, touching her chest and then offering one hand in the human style. Captain Maya Rios, you pinged urgent. We were closer than polite. Her crew followed in a fan, a man with sleep-starved brilliance cupped in the hollows. Under his eyes later I would know him as Samir Patel. A pair of technicians who moved like pieces clicked from different sets and made to fit anyway. Vu and Ada, the rumor said, to medics who looked like they collected headaches until they could pay them forward. A quartermaster with the bearing of a mother who knows where every sock is. 3 drones in a cage like sullen pigeons, a cart of printed tools still warm to the touch. Their armor didn't match. Their weapons were modest. Their eyes were everywhere. Elder Seth's diplomacy ridges rose. We expected a flotilla. We brought one, Maya said. It's just in pieces and wears different jackets. The rest will come when they untangle the meeting invites. Meanwhile, she looked past the elder to the melted farms and the bandaged towers. Where do you hurt? The question disarmed the holotorium faster than any treaty. The Eastern Arc, Seth managed. They cut our farms open and drank the power sinks. We sealed the breach. We are afraid they'll return when the crops forgive us and grow. Maya nodded as if he'd told her whether. She snapped a tight string of syllables to her crew. 2 teams. Vu, Ada seal the arc, mate their grid to ours without spiking. Doc, inventory air and strangers. Samir, find me a way to make their next approach worse than fasting. I want a draft plan in 20 and a messy one in 5. I'll walk the rim. I did something I was not supposed to do. Raised my frill like a child in a lesson. Archivist Erie, I said. I know the rim, and the places where the ghosts live. Maya turned attention like a lamp. You come then. The rim is a good place to hear a patient star. The amber dwarf thrums through the ring like a heartbeat through bone. We clipped our boots to the service rail, and the world fell away with the comfort of a familiar betrayal. Maya moved like a sailor, like gravity is a suggestion and mass is a rumor and balance is a religion. You practice every day. You aren't what I expected, I said. The sentence fell out of me and lay between our magnets. What did you expect? Her voice was curious, not wounded. Noise, claims, flags large enough to cast weather. I gestured at the stone garden with my chin. Its hull looked like someone had thrown rocks at it, and it had chosen to keep the dents as a diary. Your stories reach us with their sharp edges forward. Fair, she said. We're louder than our good days, and our bad days have marketers. She stopped at a maintenance hatch and ran fingers over the seal, checking the way you check a friend's pulse. But most of the time, it's checklists and neighbors and trying not to break the things we're saving. Deathworlders, I said, trying the word as something smaller than a monster and larger than a species. She leaned against the rail, eyes on the line where farms turned into service way. Where I'm from, we name our storms so we don't pretend they aren't family. Earth's one long storm that learned manners in between throwing chairs. We survived our planet long enough to get sentimental about it. Sometimes we forget to share the sentiment part. I pointed at the East Arc, at the glitter where farms had become museum glass. We built soil in the sky. They broke it like candy. We'll make it boring again, she said. And I blinked at the audacity of promising boredom to the universe on the walk. She asked questions the way a medic palpates a bruise, gentle, purposeful, prepared to be disliked. Where did the rivers cut, exactly? What metals are cheap here? How old are your heat sinks? Show me the seam where the old infrastructure meets the retrofit. She listened without correcting. She took photos of our ugliest welds and called them beautiful and meant it. Back in the holotorium, Samir had colonized a corner with a projection table and an energy drink. That smelled like insect fear. He beckoned us over without looking up. The figures in his model wove themselves into a ring that moved like the ray, but also like a dance step we had not learned yet. The rivers rode minimal gradient lines. See here. Here, he said, tapping curls of light that turned into numbers and back again. We can't brick those off without months of scaffolding. So we scuff them. Scuff, Elder Seth repeated, tasting the unfamiliar verb. Mass marbles, Samir said. Dense nodules, small, lots of them. Not enough gravity to ruin your traffic. Just enough to make hungry algorithms pick a slightly different path. He swept them into place, and the model's predicted vectors shivered and steered themselves a hair off their old intent. Then we salt the path they'll pick with something they hate. What do they hate? I asked. Being wrong, Maya said from behind me. So we write them a riddle with a timer. She was smiling, but not with triumph. With relief, maybe, and having found a thing she could do with her hands. Vu and Ada returned with a trolley of recovered copper ribbon and a box of fasteners. They'd stolen from a dead section of rail that would not miss them. Power's limping, Vu reported. Limping beats bleeding. We tied your towers into a subgrid until the main bus stops hating us. Our standards, began the chief of utilities, are good, Ada said earnestly. We'll help you keep them once the house isn't on fire. I watched people who had not slept in days learn to be brave in new ways. Admitting ugly can hold. Letting strangers into the rooms where the ghosts live. Saying yes to plans that weren't polished enough to sing dot by third bell. A flotilla of polite ships finally began to trickle into the traffic lanes consortium cutters. With stamped approvals. A clergy barge with prayers that probably worked on some physics. A chartered freighter with crates of patched-together goodwill. We would be grateful for them. We would need the long, slow kindness of bureaucracy. But when the River's thin shiver appeared again at the edge of the ray's sense, when the amber dwarf kept humming because stars do not care, when the slot in my stomach opened where fear lives and memory lives and love for soil lives, it was the Stone Garden's crew already under our skin. Positions, Maya said. Voice low and steady on the array wide. If you're not on a list, you're in a shelter. This is a please and a thank you, Captain, Elder Seth said. Formal again because formality is armor. We asked for help. You have it, she said. And you have us. There is a difference. I clipped my recorder to the rail and did the last unarchivist thing of the day. I stayed where history would splash. The Rivers cut toward us. Hungry as Euclid. We did not have enough time that we had Earth. Deathworlders do not pray with incense or algorithm. They pray with checklists. Within an hour our farms smelled less like cooked glass and more like damp soil. The humans wore masks because our air is sweet enough to confuse their lungs. They tucked tools into belts like charms, muttered to each other with the grammar of triage. A pair named Vu and Ada, how can mouths make such small names, stood in our vapor garden and taught our novice engineers to tie a broken tower back into the grid using salvaged rail and a sandbag full of magnetite. It's ugly, Ada said cheerfully. But ugly holds. When our chief objected about standards, Vu only said, standards matter. So does being alive long enough to keep them. Their drones flitted like curious insects, mapping, sniffing, sneaking into cut channels. One drone returned with a strip of our own copper ribbon coughed up by a river's maw. Maya didn't look proud of that find. She looked angry on our behalf. At the holotorium, a different liturgy. Humans, my people, and the handful of traitors who'd been too stubborn or too poor to evacuate, all hunched over the relief model of the array. Samir Patel, a physicist who had the tired eyes of a man who had wrestled angels and deadlines, drew loops in air with a stylus that left behind misty light. The Rivers won't hit the same place twice, he said. They learn, good, so do we. Their vector in was a long minimal gradient, lines easier on the drives. We scuffed the gradient. Our gravitic sculptors are months from alignment. Elder Seth said, so don't sculpt, smudge. Samir flashed the brief grin of someone who teaches because it's the only way. He knows to be gentle. We scatter a handful of dense nodules, mass marbles on a quick release around the approach. Not enough to wreck ships, just enough to make the Rivers pick a different path. And then, I asked, because Deathworlders like questions that can't be answered with the current inventory. Then we leave them a door we want them to choose, Maya said from the doorway. And when they do, we make the door bite. I followed her to the rim. We walked in the amber light of our dwarf. Boots magnetized to the service rail where the array's curve fell away into black. She moved like a sailor learns to move, never trusting a floor to be where she left it. You aren't what I expected, I blurted. Diplomacy was a subject I had not yet copied enough lines of. What did you expect? Maya asked. It was not a defensive question. It was a hand extended. Noise, demands, flags. I wrapped my frill close. Human stories reach us with their sharpest edges forward. She grunted. Somewhere between amusement and regret. We're a lot of things. Loud is one of them. But this isn't a flag day. It's a neighbor day. Deathworlders, I said. Less like a label, more like an invitation. She leaned on the rail and squinted into the starfield. Where I'm from, storms get names so we don't pretend they're not part of the family. Also so we can swear at them properly. Earth is a storm we survived long enough to learn manners. Sometimes we forget the second part. Your reputation isn't wrong, she said dryly. We are stubborn. We self-medicate with optimism. And we will absolutely run toward a fire to see who else is there. Is that? Wise no, she said, and smiled with all her teeth. But it's kin to something that is. What is that? Refusing to outsource compassion, she tapped the rail. Your array is beautiful. The way it curves. The way you built soil in the sky. I'm not letting someone cut it open because we were scared of being exactly who we are. We watched the night drink our breath. Below, drones stitched. Above, the first of Samir's mass marbles glittered tiny, shadows thrown across a black so deep it made my bones ring. When the rivers came, they came like they always do, a shiver on the edge of sight. A grammar of vectors you can feel in your teeth. Our trap wasn't ready. We sprung it anyway. The rivers slipped around the new gravity scuffs with the smug inevitability of water-finding slope. They ignored our patched farms and aimed at the arc where our river towers met the old heat sinks, the seam that had survived 3 refits and 1 near accident and carried just enough stress to be interesting. They're learning, Samir said. Not quite proudly, Maya's voice snapped down the array wide. Doors open. Drones to position. If you're not on a list, you're in a shelter. This is a please and thank you. I took my recorder to the rim against orders and crouched behind a maintenance housing, whose surface still smelled of human solvent. I watched their door bloom. Humans don't make pretty bait. They make bait that makes a hungry thing think it invented hunger. They lit a flare of coherent nothing in the seam, a problem that a river's sensory code could not stop thinking about. The first machine angled toward the flare. It looked like a skeletal manta mated with a geometry lesson. At its core, a tasting organ made of violated equations flexed toward the impossible glow. Not yet, Maya murmured. She held a palm up toward the drones as if they were dogs she had taught to love restraint. The river extended its maw. The flare pulsed wrong. Now, Maya said that the drones are drones now. I realized with a small shock poured our own coolant into the maw. Not cold, not heat, discipline. Supercooled fluid with a lattice of impure salts that clung to the river's internal veins and ruined the timing of its ugly music. The machine convulsed. It wasn't dying. It was confused beyond the budget of its doctrine. Ada's team fired a grapnel made of welded farm rail and bad intentions into the river's flank. Vu popped mag anchors into the ring directly under me. The river tried to torque away. The anchors hummed. Reinforce the seam, Samir shouted, fingers flying over the mass marbles controls. We're going to snap it their way. We had expected to repel, not capture. Deathworlders do not like clean endings. They like options. On 3, Maya said, as if numbers could make fate domestic. 1, the drone's coolant lattices thickened like a winter story. 2, Samir dragged a mass marble a hair's breadth left. 3, they closed the door. Not the beak of a trap, but the curve of the array itself, a flex of half a continent of constructed muscle. Our old heat sink sang. The seam buckled the way paper buckles when it remembers it used to be a tree. The river's maw, wedged over the flare, found itself stuffed with a city. The sound went through me, and then lived there, like grief. Cut. Maya barked. Ada's crew blew the grapple line before it could pull the whole ring into folly. The river tore away wounded, weird, suddenly more mass than maneuver. The mass marbles turned its escape into a waltz with a drunk partner. It caromed off an anchor and spun out toward the dark. A second river had learned from the first. It came in hot and oblique, jaws closed, spine armored. Of course you did, Maya muttered. Okay, we play your game now. Humans do not bring enough guns. They bring just enough brains to make other people's tools into guns. We had laser welders. We had anti-meteor tarp cannons. We had spools of smart rope meant for cargo handling and arguments about art. The welders drew a line across the river's face. The tarp cannons flung a web the machine refused to parse correctly. It slowed by fractions and found that fractions add. The smart rope went taut, then smarter, based on a sampling of the river's microtremors. It tuned its pull mid-scream. Who taught your rope to sing? I breathed. Maya grinned into the comm. A choir director in Detroit. Long story. The second river realized we were wasteful, savage, ridiculous, and that it was losing. It spat something back down the seam, a packet of rewrite code. That would have taken our drones apart from the inside if Vu hadn't been rude enough to unplug the entire drone net, count to 2, and plug it back in with a ferocious No, the machine staggered. So did we. The seam held with a noise like old bones telling stories about when they used to fight storms. Then it was over, not with a clean explosion, but with a limp retreat. The rivers fled, clutching their damaged doctrine. The flare winked out, a candle blown, because we all suddenly remembered we were out of breath. Silence rolled around the array. My recorder kept recording, because it had never been taught when to stop. Count, Maya said softly. Elder Seth's voice shook as he read names. Not many. Not compared to the first raid, but too many compared to none. A welder. A cousin who refused to leave her hydroponic raspberries and learned, in a final red second, that raspberries do not need heroes. A student who had written poems about our ring's curve and died under that same curve, holding a spool of rope that had learned to him. Maya bowed her head. So did Samir. The crew touched helmets to chests, to rails, to each other. Deathworlders mourn quickly, because speed is the only gift they can give the dead, without stealing from the living. When Elder Seth finished, Maya looked up. We'll be here when they come back, she said. And we'll have better jokes. Jokes? I asked, wrecked and raw. Hope with teeth, she said. We paid them, of course, in calculus and contracts, in spools of our finest silk wires, in the right to pick a dock's worth of seeds from our gene vaults, because Deathworlders collect futures like sailors collect stories. But the real debt didn't fit on a ledger. In the cycles that followed, the rivers tested us. They nibbled. They adapted. So did we. The stone garden stayed, not as a sentinel only, but as a neighbor. They traded recipes for coolant that wouldn't poison our fish with recipes for bread that would forgive our clumsy ovens. They taught our children to swear in 3 languages and then apologized to our elders and then taught the elders anyway, because swearing is useful when a seal pops at the wrong time. Samir ran seminars in a borrowed lecture dome titled Terrible Ideas That Worked. They always filled. Vu and Ada trained a generation of technicians who wore their tools like jewelry and their safety harnesses like capes. Elder Seth started labeling things ugly with a small, private smile. I wrote, as archivists do. I categorized. I tried, with an honesty I hadn't earned yet, to not turn survival into myth too quickly. But some days, myth is how the mouth fits around gratitude. On the morning the stone garden finally undocked to meet the rest of their polite flotilla, the array gathered along the rim. Gifts traded hands, jars of soil, bracelets of printed resin, a hat so offensive to fashion that it made Maya's crew howl with delight. Maya clasped my forearm the way humans do when they mean it. You saved yourselves, she said. We just made it louder. That is the most human sentence I have ever heard, I said. And she laughed like someone who'd found the clean edge of a blade and decided it was a mirror. Keep your mass marbles jittered. Move your seam anchors every week so the rivers can't build a religion around them. Don't get precious about process when the air is leaving the room. And teach your rope to sing in minor keys. Predators hate minor keys, I promised. I meant it. Why stone garden? I asked, because I had never dared before. Earth, she said simply. Our first garden was stones and weather and things trying to kill us. We made a home anyway. It's a reminder. As they cycled the lock, Samir turned and tilted his head at the array's curve. You know the joke, right? He said. We have many, I replied warily. You asked for help, he said, eyes warm. But you got Earth's Deathworlders instead. We noticed. Good, he said. Because so did we. The lock closed. The stone garden drifted away. Engines a hush like someone exhaling after holding breath for too long. We watched until the ship was a point, and then a thought, and then a habit we refused to break. The rivers came again, someday. Of course they did. We were ready. We were more than ready. We were ourselves, amplified by a friendship we hadn't been wise enough to request, but had been brave enough to accept. In the archive, under the entry for the raid that didn't end us, I added a line I had learned from their mouths, hope with teeth, because that is what it felt like when the trap closed and the rope sang. And we did not count only the dead, but also the saved. We had asked for help. What we got were neighbors who ran toward our fire loud, stubborn, uninvited, perfect. Earth.